Dear Canadians, I would like to welcome you from Innsbruck, Austria. My name is Matteo Saveriano and I am an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science and at the Digital Science Center of the University of Innsbruck. I am pleased to make my contribution to the lecture series showcasing young Austrian scholars and scientists. As a researcher in the field of robotics and artificial intelligence, I will talk today about making robots to learn from human observation. I believe that the widespread of artificial intelligence, or AI, and robotic solutions makes this topic of interest also for you, Canadians. Let's first have a look on how robots perform complex tasks. For many years, the sense, plan, act paradigm, also called the sense, plan, act loop, has been used. In the sense, plan, act loop, the robot first senses, perceives the environment, typically using visual sensors, cameras, or haptic cues, then reason on what it has observed and plan a sequence of actions considering the goal that it wants to achieve, and then act in order to modify the state of the environment. This loop is repeated until the task is successfully executed. This can be shown to work in limited conditions and, of course, has some limitations. So the paradigm itself, it's kind of valid, but limitations exist. The first big limitation for me is that the sense, plan, acted loop, it's hard to generalize. What does it mean? This means that if we change a little the task that the robot has to execute, we need a big redesign effort to make the loop working again. Another limitation of this sense, plan, act loop is that it usually requires significant domain expert, so roboticist, expert in robotics, and tedious hand programming. To overcome the limitations of the sense, plan, act paradigm, researchers started to investigate different possibilities. So some people investigate the possibility of replacing completely this paradigm and, for example, fuse together all the three parts and perform sense, plan, and act using the same system. Other people, like me, instead, still keep the sense, plan, act paradigm into the game, but try to integrate machine learning and artificial intelligence, or AI, as usually called, solutions into it. I am particularly interested in the way human beings acquire new skills and how we can replicate this on artificial agents like robots. We can therefore consider how human beings acquire new skills, for example, during their childhood. How children learn, for example, to write or to drink. Where this ability comes from? It's something that comes in our genes, or it's something that we acquire during time? Well, we know that from neuroscience that observing adults and other children performing a task, it's a big driver for children to develop their sensory motor capabilities. We are kind of born with this ability, and some researchers attribute this to a specialized area in our brain that is usually called the mirror neuron system. The mirror neuron system is a group of specialized neurons that mirrors, replicate the actions and behaviors of other people. And it is known that it has an important role in the development of several neurocognitive functions. For example, the language, the social connection, cognition, the empathy, and the motion. So the research question I try to answer in my daily activity is, can we transfer the human imitation capabilities to artificial agents like robots? And if yes, how we can do this? What's the best way of implementing imitation capability into robots given the current technological limitations and issues that we have to face? If we have a closer look at how we can imitate a task as a human, we have two big categories. One category is the observational learning, and the other one is usually called kinesthetic teaching. In observational learning, the learner observes, looks at the teacher performing the task, and then tries to imitate this task. This is appealing because we just need to observe something in order to replicate it and acquire this new skill. However, in order to use observational learning in robotics, there are several technological limitations that we should overcome. First of all, when I say look, means we have to use visual input. So the robot should collect a video showing the human performing a task and extract from this video feasible motion parameters that allows the robot to replicate the task that it has observed. This is at the moment not an easy task. There are techniques and there are current big advances in the field of image and video processing driven by new deep learning methodologies. However, I still think that these methodologies are not mature enough to extract reliable motion parameters that allows the robot to replicate an observed task. There is also another issue in observation learning, that is the so-called correspondence problem. The correspondence problem arises every time an agent tries to replicate a motion observed from another agent with a different kinematics. This is the case often of human and robots, and you can imagine this as a human trying to figuring out yourself galloping as an horse, and how hard this can be. For this reason, I also looked in my research at alternatives, and kinesthetic teaching arose as a possibility, a concrete possibility to demonstrate tasks to robots. In kinesthetic teaching, the teacher physically guides the agent towards the task execution. In the robotic case, means physically interacting with the robot. This, of course, poses some safety issues. However, the research in the safety field and in the safe human-robot interaction has made significant advances in the early 2000s and also in the last years. And currently, we have reliable and robust technological solutions that are almost industry-ready and allows us to safely interact with the robot and demonstrate these tasks. Then, I widely adopted kinesthetic teaching in my research to demonstrate tasks and collect training data for the robot. What this training data looks like? Well, they are positions, velocity, forces, gripper commands, and stuff like that. Then, once we have the data, the question that arises is, what do we do with this data? Well, with this data, we basically have to convert this training data into robot abilities, into robot skills. We again rely on a biomechanical concept, and in particular, we looked at the concept of movement or motion primitives. The movement or motion primitives theory explains complex human behaviors as the combination of basic or primitive actions and motions. We can make a parallelism to make this easier to understand with natural language. And we can see that the task is a word in our natural language or an entire sentence, while the motion primitive is a letter in this word. Then another research question arises: how do we transfer the biomechanical concept of motion primitives to a robot? And in other words, what is the best way of representing a motion primitive for a robot? A motion primitive should be compact in order to represent a demonstration with only few parameters. This is because we are interested in acquiring as many skills as possible and storing them in memory. So we need somehow to save storage space and reduce the number of parameters. Moreover, the output of this motion primitive should be easy to compute. This is because robots requires input in real time and high frequencies. These frequencies usually ranges from 1 to 10 milliseconds. Of course, sending data too late may result in a task failure. The motion primitive, at the same time, should be flexible enough to encode diverse robotic skills, and it should be possible to adjust and adapt the motion during the execution in order to cope with little changes in the executive context. I think that among other possibilities, stable dynamical systems represent a well-suited approach to encode and represent motion primitives. A dynamical system is, in general, a nonlinear mapping between an input variable or vector, usually called the state, into its time derivative. In robotics, the state can be the robot position, velocity, forces, or combination of these. And the dynamical system will map this into the time derivative. The dynamical system can be forced to be globally convergent, meaning that we can use a dynamical system to generate robot control input from any point in the robot workspace. Few tunable parameters are typically enough to generate complex motion trajectories. This means that we only have to store few parameters for each motion. Moreover, with few parameters, we can use data-efficient algorithms and tune them or learn them from training data in an acceptable time. As for biological systems, robots driven by dynamical systems can adapt their behavior online to cope with unforeseen and unexpected changes in the executive context. This is the example of an object that is placed on the robot path. Finally, multiple dynamical systems can be efficiently combined in order to generate more complex motions. So far I talked about basic skills, also called motion primitives. But we, as humans, are able to do more. Let's therefore now focus on more complex activities like preparing a pizza or preparing an espresso. These everyday activities seem natural and easy for us as a human, and we perform many of them every day with a very little mental and physical effort. Think, for example, during your normal day. You go out from home, you go to the work, and these kind of things you do naturally without being forced or without feeling really them. However, human everyday tasks are complex neurocognitive activities that require a significant amount of movement and a lot of objects typically involved and manipulated, sometimes even at the same time. Moreover, sometimes we have to place and use constraints, different kind of constraints, in order to execute properly an everyday task. Time constraints is one example. If I need to catch a bus or a flight, I should be there in time. This is an example from everyday life of time constraints. If I have to pick laundry from my wash machine, I have space constraints, because I need to open the door and I have a limited space from which I can take the laundry off. While preparing an espresso, for example, I first need to grab the cup and then pour the liquid inside. Otherwise, the task fails. All these constraints that I mentioned calls for a proper representation that allow us to effectively orchestrate complex robotic tasks. To represent everyday human activities, we exploit an hybrid framework where logical constraints, pre- and post-conditions, environmental stimuli from perception and sensing, and motion primitives are merged together. In our hierarchical decomposition, the root is an abstract concept, simply the name of the task, for example, prepare coffee. Then, the task becomes incrementally more specialized while going down into the hierarchy or into the tree. And at the leaf level, we have nodes that are one-to-one mapped into the motion primitives and becomes executable for the robot. The task execution is regulated by logical pre- and post-conditions. A logical precondition is a set of logical variables that are true before executing an action. For example, in order to grab a cup, I need that the cup is graspable, it's on the table, and my hand is free. After grasping the cup, I have that my hand is not free anymore because there is the cup inside, and the cup it's not anymore on the table, but it's in my hand. This logical pre- and post-condition allow us to set and force strict logical execution constraints on our task. However, we think that this is not enough. Some tasks do not have hard execution constraints, and over-constraining the task just for robotic execution may be non-optimal. For example, if you have to top a pizza, doesn't make a big difference if we put mushrooms first or ham. In all these cases, we have ambiguities, logical ambiguities, since we have multiple actions that can be executed potentially at the same time. In order to solve for this ambiguity, we decided to incorporate in our system continuous perception from the environment. So we transform sensed data into an emphasis parameter, a scalar value that ranges from 0 to 1, and assign this value to each node in the tree. Whenever an ambiguity appears, we can solve that by executing the most emphasized node. It is clear that hand designing and programming such a complex system with this hierarchy is not feasible, or it's in general very hard, and again requires domain expert knowledge and good programming skills. Once again, we proposed an approach to learn this hierarchical task from human demonstration. We assume that the tree is partially specified by the user. In order to free the user from specifying complex logical conditions and actions, we just ask the user to specify high-level abstract nodes in the tree. For example, prepare coffee, add coffee, and similar things. In order to further simplify the work of the user, we rely on pick, use, place sequences of action that allow us to perform general manipulation tasks. Given this partially specified tree, the user can then demonstrate continuously the task. The demonstration is automatically segmented and split into basic unit of motions, the so-called motion primitives. These training data are then used to automatically fit the parameters of a stable dynamical system, usually the dynamic movement primitives, used then to reproduce the task. Segmentation is performed considering simple but robust and effective criteria. We consider robot objects' distances and explicit commands for the robot gripper. In our framework, usually we command the gripper to grasp an object or release it. Each of these segments is then mapped one-to-one into an executable motion primitive. Moreover, we also create a symbolic node that is attached to the trees and complete the knowledge base. How do we attach the tree in the proper place? It's another problem that we have to face. Once again, we use emphasis and continuous monitoring of the environment in order to decide where a new segmented action has to go. During the demonstration, we use robot object proximity and transform this into an emphasis. And then, once a new segment arrives and a new symbolic node is generated, we attach this node to the most emphasized robot behavior. After the demonstration, the robot is able to automatically and autonomously perform the task. Moreover, our framework increases the robot flexibility and allows real-time and online replanning in case of changes in the executive context. In this video that I recorded during my research stay at the Technical University of Munich in collaboration with the University of Naples, we performed few experiments to demonstrate the effectiveness of our approach. The robot has to learn the human everyday activities of preparing a coffee and preparing a tea. These activities were selected since the outcome is clear and evident for a human observer. The user starts demonstrating the task of preparing a coffee. Kinesthetic teaching is used to demonstrate the task. As you see, the demonstration is automatically segmented and new nodes are automatically attached to the tree in order to complete the robot knowledge. These nodes are one-to-one mapped into executable motion primitives. The robot grip is controlled using verbal cues or speech commands, in this case open and close. Gripper commands are also mapped into symbolic nodes and executable actions to complete the task. With our framework, it's possible to easily demonstrate and reproduce complex everyday tasks. After the learning, the robot is able to autonomously execute the task of preparing a coffee. We have tested this in different conditions by randomly placing the objects on the scene. We use emphasis to disambiguate between taking water and taking coffee. As a human, you will understand that putting the coffee first in the cup or the water doesn't play a big difference. However, mixing can be only done after water and coffee are in the cup. Therefore, we place a hard logical constraint on mixing, and mixing is only executed after that the robot has poured coffee and water into the cup. Instead, we use emphasis and robot-object proximity to decide which task comes first. In the video, you see that the robot approaches the bottle first, since it's the closest object, and then starts to perform the pouring task. Then, the robot takes the coffee and pours the coffee into the cup and places that. Only at the end, the spoon is grasped by the robot, used to mix the liquid and the coffee powder into the cup, and then the task is successfully executed. As I mentioned, our framework increases the flexibility in the task execution. In order to show this, we have performed an experiment where the human and the robot execute the task in a cooperative manner. While the robot is trying to grasp the bottle in order to pour the water into the cup, the human decides to do the task himself. This can be because the human is faster, or because in that moment he thinks that it's optimal to continue the execution. So the human takes the cup and pours the liquid. What the robot does is use sensing information that tells that the bottle is not anymore in the scene, to discard all the branch of the tree that is related to the button and switch online to the next task, that is taking the coffee and pouring coffee into the cup. We have also demonstrated that our framework can be used to incrementally acquire knowledge of new tasks in slightly different domains. In this case, the robot is asked to prepare a tea. The water, it's an ingredient of the tea, of course, and the robot knows how to pick a bottle and pour water into the cup. Then it can execute this part of the task without any human intervention. After the task is completed, the robot knows that there is another object missing because the human has specified that in order to prepare a tea you need water and tea, but it doesn't know how to use this new object. The robot triggers the human and asks for a new demonstration. The human can conveniently, using kinesthetic teaching, demonstrate how to place the tea bag into the cup. Again, our system automatically segments this demonstration and incrementally add new nodes to the tree and lets the robot acquire new knowledge. We think that this approach can be potentially used to learn a variety of tasks and make robots incrementally more autonomous. To summarize my talk, we have seen how human observation can be used from a robot to acquire new skills. And we have seen that this is not only possible, but often convenient. And it opens the door to users with limited robot expertise to use effectively robot to perform everyday activities. We have also seen how motion primitives and the motion primitive theories that explains complex human motion as the sequencing and adapting of basic unit of motion can be transferred to a robot. I discussed the possibility to use stable dynamical system to compactly and flexibly encode motion primitives and presented several advantages arising from this choice. I then moved from simple skills to complex tasks and everyday human activities. Human everyday activities are complex and involve many actions and objects to manipulate, as well as various types of execution constraints. In this case, we used a hierarchical decomposition and a hybrid framework that use symbolic representation, emphasis, and motion primitives in order to properly learn, sequence, and execute everyday human activities. We have seen that this combination increases the flexibility of the framework and allows to quickly replan the task, to cooperate with the human, and to incrementally acquire new knowledge. Before concluding my talk, I would like to thank again the Austria Cultural Forum in Ottawa for giving me the possibility to contribute to this lecture series. Greetings from Innsbruck.